Now we're going to talk about how to determine if two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither if we're given a graph, and we're also going to talk about how to find that out if we're given points that the lines go through. All right, so we're going to start with the graph. So if you're given a graph like the one that you see and you're asked, are those lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither, it will be beneficial to look at the graph to begin with and kind of go off of what you see. So if I'm looking at these two lines that are graphed, I know, based on what I know about parallel lines, that they're definitely not parallel, because remember, parallel means that they will never cross no matter how far you extend them, and these lines definitely cross. And so these lines are either going to be perpendicular or neither. So that's where you start. You start by just looking at the graph and kind of seeing and narrowing down your possibilities, okay? So, like I said, we know right now that it's either going to be perpendicular or neither, okay? So then from there, we have to use what we learned from the other videos and kind of go off of what we know about, in this case, perpendicular lines, to figure out which one it's going to be. And so if you remember from the other video, perpendicular lines have what are called negative reciprocal slopes. So what we actually have to check about those lines is to see if they're negative reciprocal slopes, or if they have negative reciprocal slopes. And so that means we have to find the slope of the line. And so remember, looking at a graph, it's actually pretty easy to find the slope. And so I'm going to just find the slope of each line separately, and we'll know what the answer is. So let's see. This line, I'm going to start with this line first. So remember, to find the slope, you're going to look, if it's a graph, it's easier to look at it as rise over run. And so if I'm finding the slope of this line right here, I'm going to pick 2 points that are on that line. And I'm going to pick points that are kind of on the crosshairs of my graph, so that I can kind of easily see the rise and the run. And so it could be any 2 points that are on the line. So let's see, there's a point right here where that line crosses, so I'm going to choose that point right there. And then this point right here also crosses at the crosshairs of the graph, and so I'm going to use those 2 points to find the slope of my line. So I'm going to do the rise over run. So rise is your up and down. So like, I'm going to start at a point and I'm going to ask myself, how far do I go up or down? So to go from this point to this point, I have to go up 2. So up 2 would be a positive 2. And then on the bottom, it's how far I go left or right. And I have to go right 1 to get there. So right 1 would be a positive 1. So the slope of that line would be 2. So I'm just going to write it right beside my line so that I'll know that that's the slope of that line. So now, remember, we're looking to see if the slopes are negative reciprocal. So the word negative means that they have different signs, and then reciprocal means that the fraction is flipped from one another, okay? So that was the slope of this one. So now I'm going to find the slope of this other line. So again, I'm going to pick 2 points that are on preferably the crosshairs of my graph. So there's a point right there. That's a good point. And then I'm actually going to go this way, and that's another good point right there, okay? So same thing. I'm going to do the rise over run. So I'm going to write that down to the side. So the rise is how far you have to go up or down. And you can start at either point. You just have to figure out how to get to the other one. So like, if I start at this one, I have to actually go down first. So I have to go down 1. So down 1 would be a negative 1. That's my rise part. And then from there, I have to go to the right 2. So right 2 would be a positive 2 for the run. And then that won't really simplify, so that would be the slope of this line. So the slope of this line is negative 1 over 2, or negative 1/2. And then you're going to compare them. So the slope of this one was 2, or it's the same thing as 2 over 1. The slope of this one is negative 1 over 2. So we're going to ask ourselves the question, do they have different signs? Are the fractions flipped from each other? So, for instance, if I take this one, or you can look at it as 2 over 1, if I change the sign and I flip it, will I get negative 1 over 2? And so 2 over 1, if I flip it, would be 1 over 2, and then if I change the sign, I get negative 1/2. So they are what are called negative reciprocals, and so that means that those two lines would be perpendicular. And so what that actually means, because remember, perpendicular means that they cross at 90-degree angles. So you could actually come in here and put a 90-degree angle into that picture, because you would know for sure that these cross at a 90-degree angle. Okay, so that's how you figure out the answer to that question, by looking at a graph. You go off of what it looks like, then you check it to see, like for parallel, you check to see if the lines have exactly the same slope. So we'll write that down. And then if they looked like they were perpendicular, like we just did, you'd have to check to see if the slopes are negative reciprocals. And then if it's neither one of those, then that means that it would just be neither, or that means that the lines are just intersecting. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, well, what happens if instead of giving you the graph, what if they give you the points that the lines go through? So like in number 2, it says given points that the line goes through. So like it says line L goes through these 2 points, and you have a line T that goes through those 2 points. They're asking you, are they parallel, perpendicular, or neither? And so you could graph it, and you could do exactly what we just did, where you kind of go off of what the graph looks like, and then you find the slope with the rise over run, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or, since they're giving you 2 points that it goes through, you can use the slope formula and find the slope that way. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So if I'm having to find the slope of this first line, at line L, I'm going to go to the side, and I'm going to use my slope formula. So remember the slope formula, you take your y values and you subtract them. So y2 minus y1, and then that's over your x values subtracted. So x2 minus x1. All right, so if I'm finding the slope here, I'm going to take my y values and subtract them. So it would be 0 minus 1. So 0 minus 1. And then on the bottom, since I started with this point, I'm going to have to go back to this point when I start with my x values. So it'd be 1 minus whatever my other x value is, which is negative 4. All right, so then 0 minus 1 is a negative 1. And then when I have a minus a negative number, remember that turns into a plus a positive. So I have 1 plus a positive 4, or 1 plus 4 would be 5. So the slope of line L would be negative 1/5. So I'll just put a little L, and then I'll put that the slope was negative 1 over 5. Okay. So now we have to go in and we have to do the same kind of thing, but for this other line. So I'm going to plug it in my slope formula. So take your y values and subtract them. So it would be 2 minus 0 on top. And then on the bottom, I got to go back to this point on the bottom. So it'd be 5 minus, my other x value is negative 5. So it'd be 5 minus a negative 5. Then I simplify. So 2 minus 0 is 2 over, and then I have another minus a negative, so that turned into a positive, so it's really like 5 plus 5, so that's 10. And that actually reduces, because 2 over 10, 2 goes into both of those, so it goes into 2 one time, it goes into 10 5 times, so then I get 1/5. So the slope for line T would be 1/5. And then we're going to compare them. So if I had to tell if these two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, then I'm going to compare them. Parallel, remember, means that they have the same slope. So you're going to look, are those two numbers the same? And notice they're close, but this one has a negative and that one does not. So that means that they are not the same, so they're not parallel. Perpendicular, remember, they have to have different signs, but then they have to be flipped from one another. And notice they're not flipped, so they're not perpendicular. So then this one would be neither. These lines would neither be parallel nor perpendicular. They would be what's called intersecting. They would just cross. Okay, so let's do one more of those. So you'll have one more example, and then you guys can work. So line M goes through those 2 points. Line N goes through those two. So we're going to find the slope. So for line M, it would be -4 minus -2 on top for the slope. And then I started with this point on top, so I'm going to go back to that on the bottom. So it'd be 6 minus 2, which is our other x value. So I have a plus or minus a negative here, so it's going to turn into a positive. So it'd be -4 plus 2, which is -2. And then 6 minus 2 is 4. Okay, so that reduces to -1/2. So that's the slope of line M. So line M, which might get confusing, the slope is -1/2. And now we're going to do the same thing, but for the other line. So now we're going to do line N, and I'll have to go down here because I kind of ran out of room. So the slope for line M, or line N, excuse me, you would do 4 minus 6, subtract your y values on top, and then on the bottom, because I started with this point, I'm going to start with the 2. So it'd be 2 minus whatever the other x value is, which is a -2. Okay, then I simplify. So we got 4 minus 6, which is -2. Then on the bottom, I have 2 minus a -2, so that would turn into a 2 plus 2, which is 4. And then that one reduces as well, so that'd end up being -1/2. And so line N has a slope of -1/2. So then compare them. Are the slopes the same? Are they negative reciprocals, or none of those? And notice these are exactly the same. So when the slopes are the same, that means that those two lines would be parallel. So there you go.